Hello, everybody. Okay, this is take two on this part two of chapter 5 for Caritas and Veritate. First time I recorded it, and went almost 20 minutes, and I was like, no, excuse me, can't do that. All right, so I'm re-recording it, trying to cut this down significantly under 15. So let's speed through. All right, remember yesterday we wrapped up with Pope Benedict saying that basically religion is really important for setting the whole vision for human development, okay? Especially Christianity as showing that the human family as one collective family has to include this sort of integration in diversity, okay? We have to remain individuals but have to come together in true communion in a similar way to how a married couple does that, which is also an image of how the Trinity itself operates, right? Three personae or persons fully united, perfectly united with each other in these bonds of love. Okay, so to that end, he says religious freedom is really important. You have to have the right to profess and practice your religion in public and bring the truths of faith to bear on public life. Okay, otherwise you've only got a partial picture of human development. Okay. All right, so he warns against two harmful extremes. Secularism completely excludes religion from the public sphere. Okay, so it's like a form of discrimination against religion in general. And then religious fundamentalism is the other extreme, which excludes everybody who's not part of a particular religious group. Okay, so let's say the Westboro Baptist Church came to be in charge of the government. Everybody but the Westboro Baptists would basically be excluded from public life in a major way. You got to avoid both extremes, okay? Authentic religious freedom allows everybody's voices to be heard. Okay. Yep. All right. Big section on subsidiarity in section 57. What I want to highlight here is what he says here. In order not to produce a dangerous universal power of a tyrannical nature, the governance of globalization must be marked by subsidiarity, articulated into several layers and involving different levels that can work together. Later, he's going to talk about the United Nations and needing to reform that. He's not against the United Nations or some kind of international political authority like that, but what he's saying is it should only be handling things that individual nations can't do on their own. So again, pushing for that principle of subsidiarity. And then he says solidarity and subsidiarity always have to go together. Okay. Remember, solidarity without subsidiarity, paternalistic social assistance. Okay, just handing out free money indiscriminately and basically locks people into a state of dependence on the government. Subsidiarity then without solidarity is social privatism, where I'm not concerned about the needs of anybody else. I'm going to do me, you do you. Okay. So you got to link these two together, particularly with international aid. All right, he says this is good in terms of solidarity, but you got to keep subsidiarity in there too, which means we can't just give money to governments alone. Governments will oftentimes just keep the money for themselves. It doesn't actually trickle down to the people. We also have to direct international aid to local economic agents like businesses, individual, whatever it might be, cottage industry workers, people making baskets out of their homes, etc., as well as bearers of culture within civil society, which includes churches and organizations like that. Development, whenever possible, as much as possible, needs to be a grassroots movement, from the bottom up, not from the top down. Okay. All right. I gotta take a drink. International aid and education. All right. Okay. Talks about intercultural dialogue again, how important that is. We talked about this before, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But individual cultures have to know their own identities, values, and traditions. Important to note: technological superiority does not necessarily mean cultural superiority. All right, so just because we've got awesome tech doesn't mean that we can just go, look, you should adopt this as well. Okay, not all technology is good, and especially the ways in which we use it, not always good. All right, and then less developed cultures should be cautious about adopting technology too quickly as well. Okay, so he's saying don't just take it because the rich people are giving it to you, that kind of thing. And then emphasizes the natural law as the foundation for cultural pluralism. Why? Because the natural law is what we all have in common. The basic human goods that we're trying to protect in the natural law, like life, reproduction, seeking God, friendship, okay, those goods are universal. Okay, people in Bangladesh and the United States and Germany and Zambia, all of these different places, every person, those are fundamental human goods for us. So that gives us sort of a universal starting point. Okay, wealthier nations should contribute to international development aid. Talks about a variety of ways in which we can do that. And then development has to include promoting greater access to education. Okay. All right, so it's not just financial or economic. Okay, education, he says, this is the complete formation of the human person. Complete. So here at Lansing Catholic, we form students spiritually, intellectually, and socially, also physically with Mr. Warner, right? You're either playing a sport or you're taking personal fitness, team sports, something like that. The whole person, okay? Which means education is not just classroom and vocational training. It also means you have to have a full understanding of the human person. Why? Well, think about it in terms of art. Let's say you're building a sculpture, and if you are building a sculpture out of clay, then you're going to approach it in one way. Okay, you're going to form that sculpture in a certain way. But if you're working with marble, then you're going to have to form that sculpture in a completely different way. Okay, so your different mediums, what you're forming affects how you form it. That determines how you form it, how you approach it. So the same thing applies with people. Okay, depending on what the human person is, that's going to affect the way that you form the person. Okay, so if you've got a materialistic understanding of the person, saying we don't have spiritual souls, immortal souls, okay, then you're not going to be worried about spiritual formation. That's just not going to be a part of your education. If you've got a relativistic understanding where, look, what's good for me doesn't necessarily apply to you, that's not necessarily good for you, okay, then you're going to have problems with your moral aspects of your education, okay? All right, so that gives you a bit of an insight. You have to have a proper understanding of the human person in order to educate and form us in a proper way. Okay. Talks about international tourism as well. Says this needs to contribute to the economies, but also the cultural development and establishing education in those countries too. And it should include an authentic encounter between cultures. In other words, my vacation to Jamaica shouldn't just be me going and being an American in Jamaica. Okay, I should also be encountering the people of Jamaica and trying to understand their culture as well. Okay. Migration and labor issues. He talks about migration as a social phenomenon of epoch-making proportions. In other words, this is shifting the course of human history. Okay, tons of migration. He says international cooperation is essential, but we need to respect the rights and needs of the migrants themselves, but also of the countries of destination. Okay, so Syrian refugees are human persons with rights and needs that need to be respected. But the United States of America, Italy, Germany, France, those are also places and communities of human persons with needs and rights that need to be respected too. So there's this difficult balancing act of how do we do this? How can we welcome them and do what we can for the migrants without destroying our own country and essentially ceasing to be able to sustain ourselves too? Because that won't do anybody any good. All right. So it's tough. But there are positive and negative aspects of migration. Okay. Poverty often results from a violation of the dignity of human work. So he's talking about promoting decent work on an international scale. Decent work means work that expresses the central dignity of every person, is freely chosen, enables workers to be contributing to the development of their communities without discrimination. Families are able to meet their needs and provide education, allows workers to rediscover their own roots at a personal, familial, and spiritual level, meaning work's not too exhausting or time consuming. They have time for recreation, relaxation, and especially spiritual formation. Okay. And guaranteeing retirement at a decent standard of living. This is something internationally that needs to be looked out for. And he talks about labor unions, how they need to have a broader concern than just their own people. Okay, so the UAW, for instance, United Auto Workers, he's calling on groups like this to look for exploited or unrepresented workers in all kinds of different employment fields and in developing countries as well. Okay, so not just to be focused on what can I do for my people here, but what are other workers that are unrepresented and could really benefit from representation. Okay, last slide. Finance, consumerism, and the United Nations. Okay. My voice is going on me. Okay, finance, investing. It's got to be done ethically and directed towards improved wealth creation and development. Okay. Interesting stuff on microfinance. All right, I thought this is worth pointing out. He talks about in developing countries how things like pawnbroking might be helpful. Okay, microfinance is loaning really small amounts of money, smaller amounts than banks are sometimes willing to loan. Okay, so how do pawn shops work? Well, let's say I need a $10 loan, okay, and I've got a $10 hat. Okay, my lane's a Catholic hat. All right. So I go to the pawn shop. I say, hey, I need a $10 loan, and for collateral, I'm willing to offer this. Okay. So the pawn shop will look at the hat, say, yeah, I could sell this for $10 or 12 or $15. So if I could sell it for 15, then I will loan you $10 and you give me the hat. And then so I take the loan, I get my $10, they take my hat. I go do whatever I need to do with the $10, and then within a certain agreed upon period of time, I have to go back and pay back the $10 plus interest. So maybe I have to pay back $11 or $12. If I go back within that time limit and go, okay, here's 11 or $12, they go, cool, thank you very much. Here's your hat back. Okay, so it's a loan. They make a little bit of money on the hat, and I keep my hat and I get the loan. Now, if I don't pay back in that allotted time span, then they get to sell the hat to somebody else for $15 or whatever. Okay, and in that case, I got my loan. I'm just out my hat. Okay, so it's actually kind of a cool arrangement. She says for developing countries, some kind of systems like that could be helpful. There are other ways credit unions and things like that can handle this sort of thing as well. All right. As consumers, we have to be aware that purchasing is always a moral act. Okay, it's not morally indifferent. What you're buying, where you're buying it from, how it's being made, all of that has moral consequences. Okay, so we have social responsibility as consumers, not just companies having social responsibility. I don't want to get into purchasing co-ops right now. Last point, reforming the United Nations, plus economic institutions and international finance. The Pope is in favor of having some kind of world political authority that can help manage the global economy, bring about integral and timely disarmament, food security and peace, protecting the environment, regulating migration, etc. This is one that you may be able to disagree with the Pope on because it's not an issue of faith or morals. This is a practical necessity in his mind, okay? So you could think, no, maybe we don't actually need the UN. That might be okay, an okay position to hold. What he's saying is, I see the need for this, okay, but the UN needs to be reorganized and especially structured in a way that allows for subsidiarity, so that the UN is only handling stuff that individual national governments cannot handle. Okay, all right. But it also needs to be committed to solidarity, the common good, and the values of charity and truth. Okay. All right. So, okay, that's it there. All right, I think that's about all I had to say on that, and that was much shorter this time, so you're welcome. All right, try to read chapter 6, and I will do one on chapter 6 later. Thank you.